Greetings. This is Brother Bokari Bottle Bay, and today I'm going to be speaking on something that has come to my attention in reference to status and status correction, and how it pertains to Moors. And it seems that, again, we have individuals who are speaking on things with a demonstration that clearly shows they are incompetent. Not only are they incompetent, it appears that they are corrupt. Whether or not they are a member of some institution or what we may refer to as an agent is unclear. But what is clear is by their language, by their own words that spewed from their mouths, they are corrupt. And I will explain that. Before I get into some of the documentation that I have, I want to first speak on a few definitions that I want to discuss today. So we're going to talk about status, we're going to talk about rights, duties, capacities, conquest, and corrupt. And I want to do that so that we can set so that I can have that placed in individuals' minds as we, go through this presentation. So, status. Standing, state, or condition, the legal relation of an individual to the rest of the community. The rights, duties, capacities, and incapacities which determine a person to a given class or, a legal personal relationship not temporary in its nature, nor terminable at the mere will of the parties, with which third persons and the state are concerned. While term implies relation, it is not a mere relation. It also means a state, because it signifies the condition or circumstances in which one stands with regard to his property. The next definition we're going to read is rights. So let's go over here and let's get the, now that definition was from the Henry Campbell, 4th edition, page 1580, Black's Law Dictionary. And again, Henry Campbell Black was his surname, a modern European who compiled this information. Okay, so the second definition we're going to go into is, well, before I do that, let's talk about correction. Obviously, correction, I don't have to read that. I shouldn't have to read that definition, but you're making something. You're making a change based on knowledge or information that you have to right a wrong, or you see, in a given situation, right? As it applies in this case to Moors, or for that matter, nationals. The next is capacities. Capacity. So let's go over here. Give me just 1 second. A word having many meanings. Oh, excuse me. This is also from the Henry Campbell Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition, page 261. A word having many meanings dependent on its relationship to the subject matter. Of course, that is the same with many issues. Public capacity of municipal property is such capacity as all the people of the state are alike interested in. Okay? Capacity to sue consists in right to come into court. All right? It may mean ability, actual production of an oil well, as an example, and intelligent perception and understanding of the disposition made of property, etc. Qualification, size, space, or compass strength, power or force. The attribute of persons which enables them to perform civil or juristic acts. Okay, so I believe that last one is specific to this given situation as it pertains to the subject matter. So again, the attribute of persons which enables them to perform civil or juristic acts. The next definition is going to be conquest. Conquest. Stay with me here, please. Stay with me. Let's go down to conquest. And again, we're going to also use the Henry Campbell Black's Law Dictionary. Conquest. Well, first I want to look through and talk about conqueror. In Old English, correction, this is also on page 375 of the Henry Campbell's Black's Law Dictionary. Conqueror. In Old English and Scotch law, the first purchaser of an estate. The first purchaser of an estate. He who first brought an estate into his family, or into the family owning it. Conquest. In feudal law, conquest, acquisition by purchase, any method of acquiring the ownership of an estate other than by descent. Also, an estate acquired otherwise than by inheritance. In international law, the acquisition of the sovereignty of a country by force of arms, exercised by an independent power which reduces the vanquished to the submission of its empire. And of course, we also know that this can also take place certainly by trickery, deceit. And so, another term that I would like to mention here is escheat. Escheat. So we're going to go to that as well. Escheat, page 640 of Henry Campbell's Black Law Dictionary, 4th edition. In feudal law, escheat is an obstruction of the course of descent and consequent determination of the tenure by some unforeseen contingency, in which case the land naturally results back by a kind of reversion to the original grantor or lord of the fee. Now, what you have to comprehend here is this is in feudal law. So now I'm going to start talking about some of these issues here. Well, Bokari, you started off and you spoke on a few of these definitions, and so now you need to go ahead and explain why it's important. Because what we need to do here is we need to make sure that when we're talking about status correction, there are many things that need to be considered. If you're an individual that is considering proclaiming and declaring your nationality, which in effect you're correcting your status, is first you have to study. You must study, because you must know what it is you're doing, and you must know why it is that you're taking on this process. This is a process that is based in law. This is a process that is based in civics, in jurisprudence. And there are many areas in which you have to be aware of in terms to, so that you know that you are making the right decision. So you have to look into law, you have to look into history in order to be clear on what it is that you're doing. And once you are clear that this is in fact something that you are going to be doing, it is something that has an allegiance to something else. You now, as a Moor or as a Moorish national, has an allegiance to certain bylaws, certain laws, certain constitutions. And then when you talk about treaties, you must be aware of certain treaties that have formed certain situations throughout history that give you the opportunity to speak on things lawfully, to be able to clearly speak to substantiate your position. So you say that you're a Moorish national. What does that mean? And where does your allegiance lie in? And where does it not align? What flag are you holding? You see. So now let's talk about conquest, right? So clearly, even without looking at this definition, uh, many of us are aware of the fact that Europeans, modern Europeans, as many refer to them, came to these lands as pilgrims, as colonists, and they conducted genocide. And many of them say that it wasn't intentional, and many of them clearly say that it was. And so they warred on the Aboriginal people that were already here. And over the years, what has become cloudy is exactly who those Aboriginal people were. And most cloudy to the Aboriginal, to the descendants of those original Aboriginal people who were defined as the copper-colored Aboriginals or natives that were found here by Europeans in many of our older dictionaries, etc. And so now copper is a lot different than pale-skinned or red-skinned. Okay, copper covers a little variety there, um, and so on. And there are many depictions in many books, written by Europeans as well as the descendants of Aboriginals that clearly depict, the type of hair, physical characteristics, even how they, what they ate and their state of mind. And so these are things that you have to be, or that you should be concerned about learning before you make that decision to say that you want to proclaim or declare your nationality. Because one should not do things just because you heard it from somebody that you respect, or that you think is knowledgeable about something. And one of the other things that you should definitely not do is just listen to somebody just because they're speaking loudly and passionately. I make it a point to, if I'm going to have a discussion, or I'm going to listen to someone, I don't want to listen to somebody who is constantly hollering and screaming, and that displays some sort of state, as if they were under the influence of some kind of drug or something. I get enough of that when I used to watch television, Jerry Springer, these type of reality TV shows, etc., that I've learned about today, where people do all sort of extreme types of things. So when you're talking about proclaiming and declaring or status correction, you have to be aware of what some of these definitions and the political history that took place on this continent, so that you can make that decision. And then once you are going to be making that decision, if you are sincere, there are certain things that you must do to show your allegiance. And why is that important? Well, let's move on to the next phase. So now that we've already talked about some of these definitions, and we briefly covered conquest and so on, let's discuss about how that affects your state of mind, or how that can affect one's state of mind. Because obviously, when you're speaking of conquest, you're speaking of, in our case, in North America, hundreds and hundreds of years of genocide, of all manner of activity that took many different forms. So this conquest uh, took the form of murder, of escheating, where individuals' land was bought um, and sold, where individuals were displaced, physically displaced by force from their ancestral estate. Again, people were killed, people were murdered. Some of the other tools that were used was religion, and one ways in which religion implemented the birthright theft and the removal of the natural people from the land was through slander, um, and through their religion. So, through their religion, some of the popes would issue statements in writing called bullas, and these bullas were copied and they were sent all across the lands, and they were placed in certain locations so that people could read them, etc. Um, and amongst these bullas, or within these bullas, it was written that Moors were going to be removed from their ancestral estates, and if they didn't, as an example, change their religion to Christianity, they would either be killed or they would be removed from their lands and sent somewhere else, and enslaved. And all of their property would be at that point taken and handed over to the church, or so that they could do with it whatever they wanted. And so a part of this process was in writing. They're making claims. They're sending documents out. And so as it pertains to documents, I want to briefly talk about affidavits. The utilization of the affidavit must be the method of written communication with the courts by a sovereign or any person acting in a lawful manner enforcing the Constitution. So let's talk about sovereign for a minute. Sovereignty does not stand on its own. You can't be a foreigner and be sovereign in another person's land. An Irishman can't be a sovereign in China. But for some odd reason, people have a problem with that in North America, particularly those, of course, who have been who are dealing with the results of hundreds of years of conquest, denationalization, and certainly by those who descend from the original individuals who came over here and who took part in those activities, the brainwashing activities, moving children from one part of the continent to another part, separating them from their parents, raising them in Catholic institutions, and bringing them up without a knowledge of their ancestral culture, history, language, etc. And so the effect of that is now you have a bunch of individuals running around here today calling themselves Negro, Black, and Colored, and nigger, and things of that nature, all the while being suppressed in a decentralized or disenfranchised ghettos, communities, etc. I wouldn't even really call them a community, because they're not a community, because no one in there has any common goals. There's no common ground that really does anything, such as nationality. Nationality is, is designed, and it is a right, but it is designed to allow individuals with common goals, common political thoughts, common political goals, common religious, cultural goals to come together and exercise their rights so that they can do things. Well, what kinds of things? Okay, uh, they can uh, uh, um, have, for instance, institutions, schools, colleges, mosques, temples, um, hospitals, um, uh, media, militias, all of these types of things. Their own government, essentially. Buildings that civics and jurisprudence and law would be taking place. Places to maintain books, libraries, etc. At one point in time, Moors had all of these things, both nationally and internationally, but they were burned. And they were burned for specific reasons. They were burned so that those who were taking part in conquest could eventually be seen as the sovereign of a foreign land. That's one of the reasons why. And be seen by that as who? Not only their descendants, but the descendants of the people that they were, who were on the receiving end of the conquest, of the denationalization, of the genocide, etc. And so, why am I mentioning these things? I'm mentioning these things because there are others out there who are saying that why is it important for us to have status correction? Why is it important for us to utilize affidavits? Why are these Moors involved in law and talking about civics and sending out affidavits? Well, let's talk about affidavits a little bit more. It seems to me that these people who are referring to themselves, some of these people who are making these claims are referring to themselves as Moors, and they wear fezzes. They have television shows, or they have Moorish, so-called Moorish shows on YouTube and Facebook, and apparently they're supposed to be presenting a position so that is favorable to Moors. When in fact, when you listen to them, their own words tell you that they're truly not favorable to Moors. Well, here's what I mean. Here's an example. So one of the things that you'll hear is that, oh, these, they're all involved in these affidavits and sending out affidavits, and they're doing things and all of this kind of stuff. They're doing all of this paperwork. But these same type of people come from a situation where everything that they do in life is based on paperwork. So you're born into your ancestral estate that is now occupied by the descendants and controlled by the descendants of those who conquered your foremothers and forefathers to some extent, and who are sitting in the seats of power by and large, and they have instituted the birth certificate. They have instituted Social Security. They have instituted all manner of state-supported ways in which you can obtain food, clothing, etc. All of these things require you to fill out documents that state your status. Okay? List your address. List your mailing location, or where you receive mail, your nationality, your political allegiance, if you will. There's also, when you go to have some sort of medical attention, you've got to fill out paperwork. And all of these things have a nationality, or what people perceive as a nationality, which really isn't. Negro, black, and colored is not a nationality. African American is not a nationality. And all of these documents have a little box for you to check this stuff off. All of these things are controlled by statutes, codes, etc., which is not law. So this whole argument about affidavits and documentation seems to be a bit hypocritical. If you are traveling on the land and you refer to it as driving, and you receive some sort of attainder, or what is referred to as a ticket, and you are given some sort of what is referred to as a court date, and you end up in an administrative venue of a municipal court, or what is referred to as a municipal court, or sometimes referred to as a district court, or one of these places, etc., that generally doesn't have a delegation of authority, that they're going to be asking you to have to make some form of payment because you broke a statute. You have to fill out documentation. You have to fill out what happened. You got to go talk to somebody. You got to go plead, and then you have to write out something else so that you can plead. And then when you're done with your pleading, then they sometimes they go through due process. Most of the time, there is no due process, and you go through certain phases of adjudication, and then you end up paying, and then you have to fill out more paperwork. And then you have a whole system that is all layered and structured, that's complementary to keeping you in a situation where you fill out paperwork all day long. Insurance, you're buying a car, your title, there's paperwork for your car that states this is the so-called title for for the conveyance. There's a mortgage, there's paperwork for that, there's paperwork for, and if you're not purchasing a home, or what you think is purchasing a home, there's paperwork to go rent. And all of these things have something in common. You have name, mailing location, in some cases, most of them have black, Negro, colored, block, or what have you. And if you don't get it through that, then you get it through a census form, which happens every now and then, where they come around and ask you questions, or they'll mail it to you, and then you got to fill it out. But these people complain about this documentation called an affidavit, when you are trying to essentially seek remedy for a situation that took place in which your rights have been abridged, where your lawful rights have been trampled upon. And these people are speaking as if this doesn't happen in North America today, particularly to people who are melanated, or the poor people, either poor people in large numbers or melanated, heavily melanated people. Well, I guess this is some sort of vacuum. Maybe Bukhari is just, losing it, but I'm under the impression that the jails are filled with people who look like me. Okay, many of these people are in situations where they're in jail for extended periods of time for drugs. For non-payment of child support, which is another thing that you got to fill out paperwork for. Another way that this system is used to separate the male from the female, or the masculine from the feminine, which is another form of control and conquest. So you have all of these things that are happening, but people are talking about affidavits and these Moors who send in these affidavits, and status correction. Why is status correction important, and all this kind of stuff? People are being killed, shot on the street, because you have individuals who are employing color of law. Color is a semblance, a simulacrum, something that's not real, pseudo, fake. Okay? And so now your lawful and civic duty is to utilize a document that states your position, because you can't just go into an institution. They've already required you in other cases to fill out documentation. So now when Moors want to send out documentation that substantiates our position based in fact and in law, people have a problem. Why is that? The only way that you can attain remedy is to record it. The only way that you can go back and others can look at it is to establish paper and send it out so that individuals can be aware of it. Or when you go and you are trying to find a job so that you can live, or perhaps that's not the best word, the best usage of of terms, so that you can take care of your family, you got to fill out all kinds of paperwork and answer all kinds of questions. People want to know, are you a citizen? Are you an alien? And they want to ask you all of these types of questions. Well, why don't we look into those? Why don't we look into citizens and aliens and those things for a second here? Let's talk about that. So there are 4 types of citizenship. You have the national, the citizen, the subject, and the alien. The national, the highest rank of citizenship, the natural people of the land, the aboriginal. Citizen, the naturalized citizen, not nationalized, naturalized. Subject, this is where corporations rest, including corporate persons such as Negro, colored, black, etc. Alien, the foreigner who remains as such and is clothed with certain rights of citizenship, as is the citizen and the subject, and they can be unclothed. Of course, they have privileges. The only people who have the sovereign power, who lawfully should have the sovereign power of that land and authority to nationalize their country, etc. They should have control of their own state, of their own status, and of the resources of the land. And that is the national. So all of this goes back to where we started. Okay? If you are not aware of these facts, if you're not thinking, if you're not asking questions, then you're going to be listening to these foolish ego Negroes who are talking loud and making statements. One of the things that I noticed about these types of individuals is they have a certain way in which that they do things. And here's what I mean. So they ask you a question, and then when you start to answer, they start talking over you. They ask you another question, then they start talking over you. And they're always talking loud. They have one consistent, like if they're in an argument. Okay. I can't have a serious discussion uh, 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 um, and this type of activity is what they refer to as a debate. By the way, that's how many of them operate. But you can't have a serious, a mature conversation when individuals are hollering and screaming. Because when you holler or when you're constantly raising your voice, that triggers certain chemical responses by the human body. That triggers certain psychological responses by the human. You're going to feel a certain way. Okay, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be on edge. It's going to invoke certain emotions. Okay, and so this is another tactic that they use. They don't have to be saying anything worth a damn, making any sense at all. And of course, they're most effective with the ignorant, those who don't study, those who don't read, those who simply want a benefit. And some of these individuals certainly need help. We all need help as the Aboriginal people across this land whose resources have been um, squandered by others and that we don't have access to. Here we are, descendants on lands. Now we have today individuals who look like the descendants, who are the descendants of those who came over here to conquer, who are now claiming this land as their own, who are now saying that they are in fact Aboriginal, who are now saying that they are native here. So you have all of these things going on. You have all of these things, yet and still, people are still paying attention to these fools or these agents who are corrupt. Corrupt. And what do I mean by that? Why did I use that term corrupt? Let me show you why. Because it definitely pertains to these individuals. Definitely. Corrupt. 414, page 414 of the Henry Campbell Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. Corrupt, spoiled, tainted, vitiated, depraved, debased. Corrupt intent. A corrupt intent as an element of usury consists of the charging or receiving of excessive interest with knowledge that is prohibited by law and the purpose to violate the law. Corruption, illegality, a vicious and fraudulent intention to evade the prohibitions of the law, something against or forbidden by law, moral turpitude, or exactly opposite of honesty involving intentional disregard of law from improper motives. An act done with an intent to give some advantage inconsistent with official duty and the rights of others. Okay, so as Moorish Americans, whether you are a part of a temple or not, there are what you should be aware of is that when you have a document that is called a proclamation and declaration or a name correction, etc., first of all, you should read it. And you shouldn't sign it unless you have read it, unless you comprehend what is being stated. But that document has specific statements that are specific to everything that I've talked about here today in terms of comprehending your position and your allegiance to a given nation. Okay? So if you are in fact a Moor who has proclaimed and declared his or her nationality, then you owe allegiance to some form of government. And that government is going to have laws, etc. And paperwork is going to definitely be a part of that. As Moors today, Moorish Americans in this land, or rather, I should say, on the on northwest of Mexico, as we as Moors are referred in North America, we comprehend. Many of us comprehend that some of our ancient foremothers and forefathers, and not too long ago, were involved in some many wonderful, wonderful things. We were involved in instituting laws, bringing medicine, bringing institutions of learning to other nations. And so all forms of government, as as it pertains to each continent on this planet today, has libraries, has a Congress, has leaders, whether it's kings, whether it's queens, whether it's prime ministers, whether it's so-called presidents, what have you. And all forms of government, whether it's a part of what is referred to today as a democracy, which is not organic to this land of North America, as opposed to the Republic, which existed here long before the advent of democracy, which many people don't even know the definitions of what these words mean. But at any rate, all of these things require documentation. There's a recording of things. There is, as an example, congressional records, where you can go to various colleges and institutions, etc., and you can read, if you so choose, each session of Congress. And certainly there are certain things that took place in the past in which some of those, some things may have been omitted, but I think that you get the point of what I'm trying to illustrate here. It is extremely important, as part of any government, that documentation takes place. People need to know who you are. People need to know what you stated, what your position is on a given matter. Okay? Thus we have to proclaim and declare your nationality is are documents that says to the world, I am no longer a Negro, a black person, a colored person, these terms that were coined by others who are on this land today and in control of this land today, etc. I am a Moorish American, and I am wholly invested in paying homage to my ancient foremothers and forefathers. Who were these individuals? Moabites, Hittites, Canaanites, etc. Okay, and so on. And so, and my flag is the red flag with the 5-pointed green interlocking or unending knot, which is the 5-pointed star, which every point exemplifies love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. And so for individuals to say that status correction is not important, they're either extremely ignorant or they are an agent. Now, you can slice it and dice it, however many different ways that you want to, but that's what it boils down to. All right. And for individuals in this land where people's rights, regardless of whether or not they have melanin, or they refer to themselves as Moors or Negro, black, and colored. We have a long history of poor people being murdered, whose rights have been trampled upon, who have received no due process. Um, and certainly in most cases, if not all, or I would say all, but the vast majority, are individuals who went through a public school system that has no civics at all. That has nothing, that doesn't speak of anything to do with rights, doesn't make it mandatory to learn about the Constitution, and some of the truths that took place on this continent. Because, of course, we know why, because this continent is being run by people who are the descendants of those who came over here as pilgrims and colonists. And they don't want certain information to be learned by the masses. So I'll end with this. There's always strength in numbers, right? And in order to have an infrastructure in today's day and age, as a Moorish American, of buildings that reflect a government, that reflect a community, etc., you would have to have an existing situation in which that would be conducive to the benefit, or rather not to the benefit, or rather indicative of the existing force of individuals who are looking to do right. But that's not the case. That's not the case. That's why we have learned from records when we talk about Prophet Noble Drew Ali, when he came and he instituted certain things, and then there was dissension. Then there were the agents. The FBI were involved in breaking things down. And then you certainly had a lot of other individuals who were just wanting the fiat. They wanted to be the big man on campus. They weren't concerned with the overall structure of what was being done by the Prophet, what he had instituted. And so all of those canneries, those businesses, the trucking business, the canneries, the herbs and the ointments that he was selling, that stuff went away. All of the fiat was taken away. There was the big sellout. And so we have to be aware. So those who are coming into the movement have to study these things. You have to be aware that these things took place, and individuals who are telling you not are setting you up for failure, because when you don't know, you'll repeat these things that took place in history. These are lessons. And so we can implement certain policies, if you will, or certain practices or bylaws today to mitigate the infiltration. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to know who I'm dealing with, who I'm listening to, what is their position on certain issues, etc. So I make it a firm practice that anytime that I speak to anyone, I send them a document that basically states what I'm about and what things that I'm involved in. And certainly some of those things that I'm not involved in is naturalization, and I am not involved in birthright authentication. All right. And so I'm also not involved in any of these individuals who refer to themselves as being a part of a temple of a reincarnated prophet. Because if you have half a brain in your head, you have to ask yourself a question, and that is, what happened to the soul that was already or previously in the body of that man or that individual? And then certainly reincarnation, prior to these individuals who say that they are the reincarnated prophet, reincarnation occurs when someone passes away, they come back, and they are reborn in a new body as a child. They come through that canal, that stargate. They are born. That's reincarnation. Okay? So I find it I find it sickening, that these individuals are saying that they are part of a temple that belongs to a reincarnated prophet. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, I know I'm going off on a slight tangent here, that these individuals are, because there are so many of them. And again, if these individuals were in fact the prophet reincarnated, then where are their works? What have they done? Now we know what the prophet did between 1913 and 1928, 1929. What have they done from 1929 to 2016? All right? Think about it. Use your brain. Okay? Use your brain. Use your brain. And so, in closing, I must say that I'm doing this on the fly. Normally I take a lot more time to put together a presentation, but I hope that some of you out there have been thinking, or have been taking notes, or making mental notes, so you can ask yourself certain questions. Many of the young people out there, our minds are a lot faster than mine. And so I hope that this has made you see certain things, and made you at least ask yourself certain questions. Why am I listening to these people who make these foolish statements? You see. And you should, and for those individuals who are in the corners, or who are in close proximity to those individuals who are wearing fezzes, that's emblematical of the womb and knowledge. The tassel is emblematical of 360 degrees of knowledge. I hope you know that. Because if you are saying that you are proclaiming and declaring your Moorish nationality, and you don't even know what the hell the fez represents or is emblematical of, you got a problem. You don't need to be proclaiming and declaring your nationality. But at any rate, I hope that those individuals who have certain questions here are going back to those idiots, whether or not they be agents or just slam ignorant, and asking them certain questions. And if you choose not to do that, I would strongly recommend that you read, you think. You don't just listen to somebody who's talking out the side of their neck. Because I could sit up here and talk a whole bunch of nonsense and just sound good. And in the military, like, we got a certain term for that. Which is called a poop house lawyer, but substitute the poop with the word that is spelled S-H-I-T. So you really need to comprehend some of these concepts that I've spoken of. Don't try to do it right away. Sit down, play the video back, go to RV Bay Publications, and see what's on the site for yourself. Don't just listen to somebody who is probably going to be selling you a DVD of some so-called debate for 25 or 30 notes of individuals who are hollering and screaming and cursing all the time, talking about nothing and doing nothing. And in terms of an infrastructure, the last thing that I'll say here before I go, I think that I already covered this, is that in order for an infrastructure, even if you had a building, in order for that building to function, you got to have people that are disciplined and that have an allegiance to a nation and that are all on the same sheet of music. They all believe in the same concepts, the same major concepts that are a part of their nationality. And for Moors, it's very specific. 7 liberal arts and sciences, astrology, a strong knowledge of your ancestry, law, civics, jurisprudence, etc. Proper diet, exercise, and a ton of our other ancient practices that would be too long to break down. But those are some of the basic things. Certainly our flag, our seal, because a nation has 5 things. You got to have a constitution, a flag, a seal, people, landmass. Okay, so we already have some of those things. Now we need the minds to get together and be consistent and disciplined, and then we can make things work. But we need numbers. We need numbers of people. You see. So you're not going to be seeing any institutions, and you're not going to be seeing businesses and all these types of things and whatever. When you always have infighting, So at any rate, I hope that this has been helpful, and I'm thankful that you shared this time. And Islam, I self law am master. Peace.